I think that rather, and I'll actually start. I think that, that with a day like this, to really do a kind of wrap-up, we're going to require a lot of compilation and synthesis of the many ideas that that came forward out of our conversation. And what I think we'll do is just have sort of closing statements from each of those who are listed on your panel. And I have just the very briefest thoughts. I think that I think it's important to remember, and I think, and I would say this in particular in relation to this this last conversation, that we are doing this in part because we see real problems in the field. In other words, I don't think we're at a point where all that we have to do is a little bit of fine-tuning around the margins in terms of how training connects with the future of the society, in that we're now operating in an environment in which the number of PhD programs has diminished to, basically one, I guess, or one plus, and there clearly is some rebuilding that's going to be required if we're going to be able to replicate ourselves, and if we're not going to simply have more and more gray-haired people like me standing up at these meetings talking about what it is that's going on with the society. So I think that that underlying this conversation and underlying my interest in having the field strengthen its position in the academy is a sense that we're not as strong as we were, and that something needs to be corrected, and that there are some real problems. So I hope we don't, in a sense, lose sight of that. The second thing I would say, and for me, my interest in these issues comes really from my experience. Dan talked about the kind of accidental character of his career, and I've had a career in which not only have I never worked in a department or an office that called itself a folklore department, but I've never had a job in which folklore was in the title. And yet I find myself able, I guess to a certain extent, to function as president of the American Folklore Society after the years of that kind of career. But I think more importantly, more relevantly, when I look back on my work, there was not a day in which my training as a folklorist and the special perspective and set of insights that being a folklorist brings didn't help me, one, to operate with a framework of how human beings behave within society, and the value of tradition and the way tradition connects with individual creativity and aspiration, and how the people who talked to me and brought their issues into my office or into my meetings, how they were formulating their own view. In other words, both in terms of a big conceptual way of thinking about society and creativity and culture, and in terms of interacting every day and trying to be the head of a nonprofit organization or the head of a cultural agency, the federal agency, or now the head of a startup research center. Every day that skill set has been valuable. And so what it said to me was, well, how do we scroll back from that in order to talk about our discipline in a way that causes, a freshman in college, when asked what they're going to be when they grow up, say, well, I'm going to be a folklorist. Because I think that's absolutely the key to being a great reporter, or to being a great novelist, or to being a great manager of a company, that we see that value packaged in a way that allows the discipline to move forward. So I think that through this day, there have been a number of very good observations and suggestions about how we might move to make that happen. But obviously, it's a challenge on a number of levels, and I think the society can play an important role, a leading role, in helping to achieve some of those goals. So I hope that by taking these issues up, talking about a lot of practical solutions, we didn't step too far aside from the fact that there is a real problem with folklore, and there are things that we have to do if the discipline is going to remain strong far into the 21st century. But I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that the essential ingredients, that essential vision, the perspective, the value of that point of view, is something that is unique to folklore, and that I think if we understand it a little better and think hard about how to express it, we can begin to build ourselves back and beyond where we have been. So that's my comment on it.
I mean, to me, listening to the day's talk, I was especially happy to see Maria's talk and Pat Turner's talk, just because it's great to see, you know, to hear our shortcomings and the difficulties that we face from other people rather than from ourselves. You know, is there something about hearing it from ourselves that no matter how much we come up with new and interesting ideas, we know some of those things, and it's important for us to constantly hear voices from outside the field so that we can try to figure out how disciplines can interrelate to each other and how disciplines can be mutually beneficial to each other. And I guess I just wanted to end by saying that I really feel like in the academy is obviously suffering certain problems. The public sector is doing relatively well. But I do feel like the American Folklore Society in particular is doing well. And I think one of the great things about being here today is to see an invigorated society. It hasn't been that long ago that we didn't have an executive director and that the society was really just about the annual meeting and about the journal. So it's great to see a society that's able to look critically at the field and take some responsibility for the field and try to take it to a new place. Thank you.
But I'll follow up with pointing out, as Steve has done, the value of good leadership and the value of participation. This has been a great discussion. I want to say three very brief things that I heard coming out repeatedly. Number one, it's the network, stupid. Rosario pointed out that she doesn't have a folklore slot. She's looking for somebody who can give her what's useful to her. And we need to enter these conversations by virtue of having something useful to contribute, which we have in a soundbite or we have in our track record, or we, dive in and start talking in the elevator. But one way or another, we start out with that something useful and then say, by the way, I'm a folklorist. So number two, communications inside and outside the field. We've gotten a lot of useful advice on doing better in broadcasting our work outside, both to universities and to policy and so on. We have also mentioned weaknesses in internal communication in the field, that one hand is not always aware of what the other one is doing. Because of what I think of as a centrifugal tendency in the field. We're very good at local involvements. We get absorbed in those. We learn how to speak in those local languages, and we're not always reporting back to the field. And I think that's the issue. It's not that we're not talking outside. It's not that we're not talking inside, but those are segregated conversations, and they need to be networked conversations. And we could go here to network theory and sociology, Granovetter on the strength of weak ties, the bridge people who are in two different conversations and bring information from the one to the other. We really need to hear back in AFS from, what Sandy is doing. Final point then is just that what AFS can do here is to make the field's learning cumulative. This was easy when we were all doing historic geographic studies. It is not easy now. But I think there have been repeated suggestions that AFS can commission reports that synthesize issues, that synthesize fields, that synthesize the field's knowledge, or that provide tools to add to the basket, which, as John says, is all too quickly filled. in the academic programs, these online courses, the papers on what folklore can do for policy, the paper for us on how policy works. So let AFS supplement the basket with its own grab bag, but with these issues that are particularly vital in a climate which is actually favoring us at the moment. We have a moment to seize.
Well, I was thinking a little bit, particularly trying to link some ideas from this last session for me as I was thinking about the day. And I guess I want to come back to Bill's point that I think we really are at a point where there's probably, in a day like today, when we can sit in the kind of the comfort of a room like this and have the luxury of having the kind of conversation we have, can be inspiring, but it also really needs to be viewed as a challenge for us. I really think that we're facing, and we're living at a time with a really rapidly changing landscape in the cultural sector in a way that perhaps we didn't really tackle as brutally as we might today. I mean, I see a changing sector in a couple of different ways. One is we're really working truly in much more of an international global context in forces that are going to make everything is moving very quickly now, folks, from my point of view. I see a dialogue going on worldwide about a new kind of cultural work and this idea that there's a new kind of cultural worker out there that's breaking down many of the disciplines and barriers that people see as disciplinary barriers, unfortunately, who are coming from the public policy and the public side. And I think there's this expectation some people have characterized as the giving-getting compact. In other words, we're not going to support you or else you can deliver and demonstrate that you're making a difference in our lives. So I think the challenges are more starkly probably in front of us whether we want to accept it. I think what I see happening, though, and this is part of this changing landscape, there's some other things going on. I think that there's a real crisis in the humanities, as we all know. And while there have been conferences and discussions about it, those of us who spend our time in universities will tell you, particularly Research One institutions, there are some that are a little immune from this discussion, but most Research One institutions, provosts and presidents are saying, what is the future of the humanities? Do we need to support the humanities at the same level, or are they service units to teach writing skills and the kind of basic skills to do the real serious work of the 21st century? I think there's a call for us to think about a new kind of public humanities work that we really need to. I think folklorists can be in the forefront of playing a key role there, and I think we are. But we can't be complacent. And the same kind of conversations that are going on here are going on in many other professional societies right now, or professional or organizations, academic organizations. And I think we have to take that seriously and figure out where we engage in that. I also would say there are huge changes in the very structure of higher education that we didn't talk much about today. You look at the changes in tenure. University of Michigan's announced, if you follow the Chronicle, they're looking at the possibility of a 10-year period before you come up for tenure rather than 6. That's getting a lot of discussion nationwide. The whole question of tenure, the very question, we were talking about sabbaticals for public sector workers, the whole question of will there be sabbaticals in the future is a lively topic at Research One institutions in the way that they've been granted in the past. The way I look at it is, the days of Mr. Chips have come and gone. The old idea of the university professor and the way that many of us that were drawn to that world, it's a very much a world based on accountability and benchmarking and a lot of things that we're going to have to figure out how we function effectively in that as a field in the future. And forming alliances, thinking more creatively, I think is going to be necessary. Now that's kind of the bad news part, right? I heard some really good news. I heard I liked Robert Barron's list of the kinds of ways in which we may have to think differently about how we provide training and support for professional competencies. There are a whole variety of options for us, and I think we're creative enough to figure out how to make that happen. It'd be interesting to talk more about some of those and how we might do that. I also think that we shouldn't, you know, for me, one of the things that's most gratifying out of this day, though, is I think about while we didn't maybe rise up to all these challenges in one simple day here, but I think that I'm more and more convinced every day. Bill described the way that he finds every day how he looks at the world differently because of his training. I think everyone in this room does, too, who's come up in this world and of folklore. And I also think that the skills and the knowledge and the sophisticated way that we can examine expressive culture and multiple cultures and the forces that are at work on communities are things that we are really well positioned to play a key role. And we have to think about, though, doing it in multiple arenas, not in just a few arenas. And I think that's why the public policy discussion in those places is worth considering. And I guess I would say we also shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we have built in this country, and I'm speaking now in an American context, an amazing, and I think quite remarkable, set of national resources, real anchor institutions that we really need to figure out how we can continue to work together and collaborate. Clearly, AFS and the Fund for Folk Culture are doing it here. I think the sheer fact that we have an American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, that we have a Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, that we have the potential of seeing, it was great to see so many higher education institutions that have a strong stake in folklore. We have to figure out, these are all this is our infrastructure, and we have to pay attention to the infrastructure and nurture it at the same time that we nurture the I think we want a warm and friendly, kinder and gentler American Folklore Society, a place where you can come together and recharge once a year, at least here, but maybe in multiple ways throughout the year through the communications and programs of the society. So I walk away pretty inspired, but I also realize that we've got serious work to do, but I felt it was great to see so many of you here today who were really interested in taking part in this discussion and really a conversation. I want to thank again the National Endowment for the Arts for their support of this day, and thank you all for your participation. Have a nice evening.
Well, I actually always have a lot to say, but a lot to say is not a good thing at the end of a program. So what I will do is I'll quote someone, and for some of you who saw the position paper that I wrote on folklore in the academy, they will have seen this, but it's probably worth ending with. And this was written in 1999 by the then president of Columbia University in his State of the University address, and I'll just conclude with this. The arts, humanities, and social sciences must provide a counterbalance to the corrosive impact of globalization on local traditions. At a time when economic, political, and cultural patterns that have originated in the West are celebrated, often uncritically, as universally applicable, the arts, humanities, and social sciences can provide detailed data and informed interpretations of particular traditions that continue to shape the attitudes and behaviors of billions of people the world over. This was his call for what the future of the humanities and social sciences should be. This, of course, is what we do. Thank you.
I walk up here, and no doubt you wonder how many of these people are going to come back up here and say something. When can we go to dinner? When will the bar open? I just want to take one last second on behalf of the Society and the Fund and Betsy and me and Kurt and Bill personally, to thank all of you for participating in this event. We appreciate your commitment to being here today and to engaging with us to move our plotting and thinking, not plotting and thinking on these issues along. As I think I mentioned earlier, but perhaps some of you weren't here at the beginning of the day, there will be an extensive written summary and report, work for which is already going on in the back of the room and has been all day in the person of Andrea Graham, that will be available shortly, I think later on this year, on the Fund's website and on the Society's website. There will also be, as we've been doing video documentation of the day as well, and DVDs of the day's events, although you may not be able to find them at your neighborhood Blockbuster, will be available from the AFS office before too long. Or on YouTube, yeah. You can do hard copy if you want, but there's YouTube. I'll reiterate, just to say one last thing, that for the Fund and for the Society, this event is sort of a midstream event in a longer process. The Fund has been sponsoring, through support from a number of generous foundations, a series of gatherings on important issues in the field for several years now, and this is simply the most recent one of those. For the Society, this is the third of a series of 4 or 5 events this year that have been planned with the purpose of engaging the board of the Society and the entire membership of the Society in thinking critically and strategically about actions to advance the field in all the larger contexts in which the field exists over the next few years. So I want to make sure that you know that this event today points both backward to other kinds of gatherings, but more importantly, I think, forward to actions we anticipate taking in the future. Thank you once again.